you, Rabbi. But I will happily turn it over to you.
All right. That's a that's a great lead-in for Parashat Tazria. What's the right adjective? That's a great question. If you have an adjective for Parashat Tazria, put it in the chat. We'll see what you guys come up with. I do want to know
icky.
Icky, I saw. Icky could be. We are in a Jewish leap year, which you may already know. And Jewish leap year, it happened right. This year was a regular, it's a Jewish leap year and a regular leap year. While in the world, we run on a solar calendar, so a leap year means an extra day every 4 years, with the exception of the last year of a century when, to correct for some seconds, that when we're on the zeros of the end of a century, then it's not a leap year. There's no February 29th in 2000. And, when we get to 3000, there also won't be, maybe 2100, in the year 2100 also. It's every century. But I could be mistaken about that. But the Jewish calendar is a lunar calendar. It goes by the months. So when it's a leap year, we have a whole leap month instead of a leap day. So to keep our lunar calendar in line with the solar calendar, because the lunar calendar is shorter than the solar calendar. And if we didn't correct by adding a month, 9 out of every 17 years, we had a month, we'd be out of sync. And since our holidays are seasonal, we correct monthly. We correct by adding a whole month to keep our holidays in the right season. By contrast, I might add the Muslim calendar is also lunar, but does not have a leap month, which means Muslim holidays move throughout the year. So our Muslim neighbors just finished celebrating the month of Ramadan, where they fast for the month during the day and eat only after sundown. For those Muslims in the Northern Hemisphere, right, it's late winter, early spring that Ramadan fell. But Ramadan's not a spring holiday. It will drift through the calendar. So sometimes Ramadan is in the summer for Muslims, which means they have to fast much longer because the daytime is longer. Sometimes Ramadan's in the winter, so the fasts are shorter. But Muslim holidays not tied to the season, so they don't have to correct with the leap month, but we do. And I say all this because in a leap year like this, there are 4 extra Shabboses, which means this year is longer in terms of the number of weeks from a non-leap year. And what that means is just about every week this year, we read just one parashah. We're in shorter years that are not leap years. There are 4 fewer weeks. And to cover the Torah in 1 year, parshiot, right, weekly portions, are linked together. And sometimes we have what's called a double parashah. So we read 2 parshas in a week because we need to have enough parshas for this year where we don't double up. But that means in a shorter year, we do double up. And all that is a way of saying this week's Parsha Tazria and next week's Parsha Mitzorah, both which you could maybe put in the icky category. I like that. Difficult, someone said too. Icky or difficult or challenging to teach about or connect to. Tazria and Mitzorah usually come together. So we get 2 challenging parshiot the same week. And for those that are teaching or learning, you only have to struggle to figure out which verses to focus on for 1 week. This year, because it's a leap year, Tazria is this week, Mitzorah is next week. And that means we're with this material for twice as long. But that way, each Shabbat has its own parsha. And anyways, that's a little bit about the calendar and why we're just Tazria this week and not Tazria Mitzorah, which most years we have. Awesome. Perfect timing from Mara. The link to the slides I'm going to share just showed up in the chat. I'm going to post these slides on the screen for you to follow, but I know some of you like to have them open in a different screen or print them out. You're welcome to have it. You have access to it if you have the link. And with that little introduction about the calendar, we're going to jump in to talk about an element of Tazria. At the beginning of the parsha, talks about impurity after a woman has goes through childbirth. But it actually drifts. The end of the parsha begins talking about different skin and other bodily afflictions, and also afflictions that appear on clothing and walls of your house that make a person impure. There's the purity and impurity system we don't use so much today, but the end of this parsha deals with people acquiring diseases that involve some sort of scar growth thing on their body. Often the affliction is translated as leprosy in the Torah. Scholars, both biblical and scientific scholars, believe that what we call leprosy today is not what the Torah is talking about. And while the topic is often labeled leprosy when translated to English, it's really some sort of affliction that people have that's not modern leprosy. So I'm going to just call it Mitzorah, which is the name of next week's Parsha, but the topic actually begins being discussed at the end of this week's Parsha. And we're going to look at one element of what happens to somebody when we get this affliction and explore a few interpretations of how the rabbis handle it. And I hope at the end, this will give us some sense of how we deal with how different generations have dealt with some of the difficult passages of the Torah to figure out. And hopefully it'll leave you with something to think about today and over Shabbat. So that's the introduction. I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to find the right part to share. All right. And I'm going to start the slideshow. Oh, sorry. My screen is freezing. Uh-oh. Oh, there we go. Apologies there. My screen froze for a second. All right. Here we go. So the verses in question come from the middle of the sixth aliyah, the sixth portion we read this Shabbat. And this is what happens to someone who gets tzara'at, who becomes a mitzorah, right, who has this affliction. So the one with tzara'at that has the affliction, their garments are to be torn, their head is to be made bare, and their upper lip is to be covered. Tameh, tameh, they are to cry out. All the days of the affliction is on them, they shall remain tameh. That's the word for impure. Tameh they are, alone they shall stay outside of the camp in their staying place. Let's talk a little bit about what these verses say. When someone has this skin affliction and they have tzara'at, there's some rituals they have to do once it's determined that they have this affliction. They tear their garments, which we know in Judaism is a sign of mourning, where we rip our garments like out of grief and despair. Right? You do that, right? Kriya, when you hear that someone has died. Tradition is to tear your garment. Someone afflicted with this sort of skin disease has to do that. Their head is made bare. They shave their head. We know that's sometimes connected to purity rituals. There are times when you are impure and becoming pure. Shaving your head is part of the process. That's especially for like someone who takes a vow to become a Nazirite. At the end, they shave their head as part of purifying themselves after not being able to cut their hair. There are other examples of times you have to cut your hair as well, but the tzara'at, the mitzorah has to do that when they have tzara'at. They have to cover their upper lip. There's some sort of way in which they cover their head up to their upper lip or their mouth or something. And they have to cry out, impure, impure. We'll talk, that's what we're going to focus on a little bit today. But during this time, while they are afflicted, they stay impure, and they have to leave the camp and go outside of the camp. They can't live with everybody else. So I set aside all the details of the skin afflictions for you. I saw someone in the chat said this is the dermatologist's favorite Parsha. If you interested in the dermatology, this is not your day for this Zoom class, but you can look at it. Although I do this week think about my father-in-law is a doctor, and one of the journals he gets is Skin Disease Magazine, which comes with pictures with all kinds of rare skin diseases. That seems like it's Sara'at magazine for the contemporary doctor. Anyways, that's just a little aside. But this is not about the actual afflictions, but what you do when you have it. And what strikes me as I read this verse is once someone has this affliction, they're sent away. They have to rip their garments in mourning. They have to shave their head. so you can identify from their baldness that something's going on with them. They have to cry out in public that they have an impurity, and they have to live apart from the community. And that for me is difficult to see. This response that says someone with a certain sort of disease has to be sent away troubled me a bit. Now, we all together just lived through a time, and we're still at the tail ends of that, where with COVID, where we know sometimes when you have a certain disease and it's contagious, separating yourself both allows you to heal and prevents other people from getting the disease. So it's possible that the separation that the person with tzara'at had to make was a way of stopping the spread of whatever this affliction was. If they had a disease and people didn't know how to deal with it, during the biblical era, while there was some notion of medicine, it was far from what today's medicine was. So contagions, especially plagues and skin diseases and rashes and things, could probably spread. It could be that this was the best practice of the day. Someone has this disease, they have to separate out, and by separating out, they have a time and space to heal, we hope, and they prevent the disease from spreading. So perhaps this is best medical practice of the day here. But it strikes me that that it's difficult that you could have the person leave to protect themselves, and that's what the verse could say. The verse could have said someone has tzara'at, and while they have the affliction, in order to protect the community, they go and stay elsewhere. But the tone of this verse seems to say, right, they rip their clothes, they shave their head, they cover their upper lip, they have to cry out that I'm sick, I'm impure, and they have to leave to a staying place that's outside the camp. It seems that they're pushed away, which is a different nuance than separated for the medical safety of the rest of the community. And it seems to me, anyways, as I read this verse, it's not just medical advice that they're taking here, that some sort of stigma is placed on the person with tzara'at as part of the separation. And I feel for the one that's afflicted, that has to go through, that can't just go quietly to their house and collect, a book to read and some clothes to change into and their toothbrush and go settle somewhere until they're better when they can heal and come back. But they have to do so with all these rituals that say, I'm afflicted, I'm separate, I'm ill, I'm different. I have to move off and away and out. Feeling that way, I went to the sources to see what do the rabbis make of this? Do they share my interpretation of this verse? And do they show concern about the stigma that maybe the Torah is putting on the person who has tzara'at? And what directions do they take it? And I found some different paths. So first, I want to jump to a passage in the Talmud. As we look at it in a second, I want to say, I almost thought about teaching it out of order because our source comes at the end of the source. But we're going to read through the whole piece, and I'll share with you why I think it's one take the rabbis have on this verse, even though it goes in another direction first. This comes from Bava Kama 92. I see some of your names, and I know you're also part of My Jewish Learning's Daf Yomi community. So not so long ago in the Daf Yomi cycle, we looked at this page. We have a source from the Talmud where the rabbis are having a conversation. Rava, a Talmudic rabbi, says to his colleague, Rabbi Barmari, from where is this matter derived whereby people say poverty follows the poor? So what's going on here? There's an aphorism that in their day, I guess people said, poverty follows the poor. There's an aphorism, right? A truism, a statement people made, poverty follows the poor. And Rava asked his colleague, why do people say this? Where does this come from? What does it mean? And Rava Barmari gives him an answer. This is from a different place, but it's, I know people are starting to think about Passover. Once Passover starts, we're 50 days away from Shavuot, so not immediate concern, but it's a holiday that's coming for us. On Shavuot, we today commemorate the giving of the Torah. The Torah talks about Shavuot as a time where we're celebrating the harvest, and people brought offerings of the new crops to the temple. And Rabbi Barmari says, what do we mean by poverty follows the poor? He has an example from the Mishnah Bikurim 3:8. Mishnah Bikurim is about bringing first fruits to the temple on Shavuot. Here's what it says. Rich people would bring first fruits in baskets of gold and of silver, and poor people would bring first fruits in wicker baskets made of peeled willow, and they would give the baskets and the first fruits to the priest. So Rava bar Mari and the rabbis read this mission very carefully. It says, rich people bring their first fruits in baskets of gold and silver, which because of their status, they're able, right? It's a festive delivery of these crops, and people who are wealthy have nice things. They have precious metal bowls, gold and silver, and they deliver their fruits in these fancy bowls for the ceremony. But what the rabbis note then, it says, poor people bring their fruits in wicker baskets. They don't have the gold and silver. They have the wicker baskets made of, right, peeled willow branches, right? Think about a lulav, right? A palm frond, the willow branch that we put with the palm frond on Sukkot, like some leaves and things. They make baskets from the willow, maybe peeled bark, peeled branches. Not sure exactly what the baskets look like. I'm not a basket weaver or weaving expert. But then it says, and they would give the baskets and the first fruits to the priest. The rabbis read this last clause as applying to the poor people, meaning the rich people come with their fruits in gold and silver. The poor people bring their fruits in wicker baskets, and they give the baskets the fruits and baskets to the priest. What does that mean? The poor people give their fruits and baskets, the wicker ones, to the priest, but the rich people just give their crops to the priest. The gold and silver baskets they get back, meaning the last clause applies only to the poor people and not the rich people. And this is how Rava bar Mari explains, poverty follows the poor. How so? The rich people who can bring their crops in these in fine gold and silver bowls and baskets that they have, get those golden baskets back. They're already rich. They're rich and wealthy people, so they have fine things, but they just give the crops to the priests. They get the vessels back. But the poor people who have to make baskets of peeled willow because they don't have the resources or they don't have, right, they're in a financial setting where they can't make anything better or bring the crops and anything better, but they have to give up their baskets. So poverty follows the poor. How? Not only do they give their fruits, but they have to give up their meager vessels. And in fact, those meager vessels, even though they're worth a lot less than the gold and silver, they might be worth more to the poor people because it's harder for them to get new baskets. So Rava bar Mari says, poverty follows the poor. And here's an example from our tradition about how poor people have it worse, not just in general, not just out there in the world, but even our rituals make it harder on them. Here's an example. And then Rava says back, you have proof from there in the Mishnah, and I have proof from a verse in the Torah. And he quotes our verse from today, Tameh, Tameh, they are to cry, right? Rava's connecting, getting Mitzorah, right? You're as some sort of piece of, right? You have this disease. Maybe he's assuming there that the people who have the disease are less well off. They're poor people, maybe financially, or just, oh, poor soul, you're sick with tzara'at. But what happens once you get this? Not only do you, right, is Rava saying poor people might be implying here, poor people might be likely to have the disease, but not only do the people get sick, but then they have to go out in public and cry out, I'm sick, I'm sick, I'm impure, and make a whole public spectacle of themselves. And he points to our verse today as there's a way in which there's some shaming of the people that are here. This, for me, raises a few things. One, both these rabbis point to pieces of our tradition where people who are down on their luck, our tradition makes it worse, not better for them. There's not a showing of compassion, but an acknowledgement that sometimes people who are down on their luck financially or with illness or otherwise get a raw deal, and they're pointing to examples where we don't help them out. In our example in particular, I'm struck that Rava assumes that people who get inflicted with tzara'at, that it doesn't seem to be a disease that's evenly distributed across the population, that poor people are more likely to get it to rich people. I would imagine that, right, we know, and we have data, health data from the world today, that certain diseases are more common in countries or neighborhoods with lower socioeconomic status. But the notion that we're labeling certain illnesses as a disease of the poor strikes me as not so compassionate. And Rav is also pointing out here that, right, here, what is the ritual described in this week's Parashat make us do? It makes us call out, right, the person who's afflicted with the disease. has it and then has to call out about it and make a spectacle of themselves, which in his piece is poverty follows the poor, meaning they're already suffering from the affliction, and then they have to suffer the shame that comes with it. And this text highlights for me, it strengthens for me my initial response to the verse that says, this doesn't sound right. This isn't the way I would want it to be. Sometimes we turn to our text, our tradition for inspiration and hope, right? We look at the Torah, we look at the rabbis, and we want to see in their words and their lessons and their stories something that uplifts us. As I sat with these two texts, I thought about another side of that sometimes we look at our texts and they challenge us because the reality they present isn't enough. When I look at our values as a people, the way in which we think about, or at least I think about, I hope you do too, that part of what Judaism is about is providing support for the poor, providing support for those who are ill. It seems to me both the ritual described in the verses today about the way this sort of calls out the sick person and has them do all these potentially embarrassing things in public and then sends them away, that's not where we should stand, not where our rituals should be. And also thinking about how that Rava reinforces that, and Rava Barmori brings another example from a whole different area of practice that says, embedded in this ritual of Shavuot about celebrating our crops and how we bring them to the temple, that the rules and traditions that existed in temple times didn't think about the needs of the different socioeconomic classes, and the system didn't try to provide for everyone, give them what they need. And we end up with a situation where poverty follows the poor, not just as a descriptive statement of the imperfect world in which we live, but actually see how it's baked into the system that we put in place. And what I would love to see in both of these texts is a call for an action, a call for a different response, a call for saying that this is not okay to be the status quo. Maybe we need some innovation here. We need something different. Now, it's not found in those texts, but of course, I don't want to end on this downer about our tradition in these particular texts. The rabbis say, Shivim panim la Torah, there are 70 faces, literally, but 70 interpretations for every part of Torah, meaning there are multiple ways to read different texts. And in my search of the different commentaries and midrashim that talk about our verse today and looking for a different way to spin it, to read it, that's a little more uplifting, that shows the direction I think we ought to be going. I found another source that I want to end with today. The Torah Tamima, a relatively contemporary commentary on the Torah, written by Baruch Halevi Epstein, who lived in the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century. A wonderful commentary on the Torah. Brings the following commentary for which there are echoes in the Midrash. So it might be that it's his take, or it might be based on the learning that he did. He starts with our verse 2, Tameh, Tameh, they are to cry out, from Leviticus, right? That's what we saw from Leviticus 13:45. And he says, this verse teaches us that when something bad happens to someone, they should announce it in public so that the public can ask, meaning pray, for compassion on their behalf. I like this turn. I like this interpretation. Unlike the interpretation I gave you before, or maybe we saw in the Talmud about this requirement that the person with a skin disease, with sarad, go out to the town square and yell, Tameh, Tameh, I'm impure, I'm impure, as a way of self-shame or a way of just separating them. There's a little more compassion here. And this interpretation from the Torah Tamima says, when something bad happens, you're not supposed to be alone with it. You're supposed to share that you're going through it. You're supposed to give notice. You're supposed to let people in the community and the public know, not to bring shame upon yourself and not to as a way to separate you and send you away, but so that people know and can respond by asking for compassion on their behalf, which could mean public prayer, right? Asking for God to intervene. It could also mean by asking for compassion on their behalf. It could be, there's a way to read this that it's not just for us to ask for that compassion from God, right? God, the healer, God, the giver of compassion, but also might be a call for the community itself to respond. We do this today. Many synagogues, in one way or another, but keep a list of those in our community are ill and say a blessing for them regularly when the Torah is read during the week on Shabbat, or maybe just on Shabbat, or maybe even post it to their website so that people can know, here are the people in our community that are ill. And we announce that not to shame them, but we announce it to pray for their recovery and to let their friends and neighbor and community know that they need compassion, and that maybe someone can reach out. And we do that both in our prayer spaces and actually maybe in our actual lives, that we take on that actual mitzvah of bringing the compassion to others. By when we hear that someone has made this call, or we hear the community echo the call to share more broadly that our friend, that our neighbor is ill, we do something about it. I'll share one tradition that just started in the synagogue in which where I go, Bethel in South Orange, New Jersey. We have a group that just started. I think they call it forgot what they call it. They have a cute name for it, but it's a group of volunteers who repurpose the flowers that are on our bima every Shabbat. The group meets Sunday morning. They take the flowers down from the bima that were there for Shabbat, and they repackage them in these nice little glass jars or vases. And then they deliver those flowers to people in the community who they know are experiencing illness or have had something bad happen to them in recent times. And they drop it off at their front door, ring the doorbell, and I think you get a text message to say, the flower committee, I think they're called the secret flower committee or something like that, has delivered these flowers to you. And I think it's this great example of what the Torah Tamima is talking about, that when we are sick, when we have experienced something bad, when we have an affliction that we know how to solve, when we're forced to withdraw from the community and hide in the place, and hide or rest or recover in a place that's a little bit removed, we don't have to be alone, even as we're separate. That we should call out and share that something we're going through hard times, and that's a way for our community to respond and to step up and to do something back on our behalf by praying, by acting, by supporting, by reaching out, and knowing that your community, that the public is there for you. I think helps people to deal with the pain and the anguish, and also might help to move forward on the path to recovery. So I'm happy to have found this source from Baruch Halevi Epstein, which rereads the text I presented before. And I personally love this response, and like now read it back into the text, because I think this sits well with my heart and my soul, and takes the difficult rituals of these skin afflictions and makes it something practical that gives us something that we could do to help strengthen our community and be there to support others. So that's what I have to share today. We have some minutes left for responses and questions. I see that while I was sharing my screen, there were 77 comments on the text. What I love about the digital space is you guys have had your own conversation during class. Like, it's sort of, we co-opted the side chat or conversation and made it part of the class. and encouraged everybody to learn with each other and to ask questions back and forth. And when there's 7 comments while I'm presenting, I can follow them. But when there's 77, I can't. So I'm dependent on all of you and our My Jewish Learning host to help me call out what's here in these sources that we might want to ask, or who should ask a question. So, Mara, if you can help me out.
Yeah, I can do a bit of a summary. I think when you first started, people were rightly uncomfortable with the idea that poverty and illness were connected, and had struggled with the idea that that cycle continues without necessarily within the text a clear answer to that. But of course you continued, and we got there in the end.
All right. So the road I designed, we traveled on, right? There's some of that dissonance is good to feel sometimes.
Yes. So people are really just sharing their thoughts, but I do think that we have enough time if anyone is interested in raising their Zoom hand.
Please.
I would love to give you the chance to have your own voice rather than me poorly reading your comments. So if anyone feels so inclined. Lois.
I had raised the question about leaving an upper lip or covering your upper lip. And since it came along with shaving your head, maybe allowing the hair to remain on an upper lip, like a mustache, means you're not fully apart from us, but you can still maintain that part of who you are.
So it could be that there's the baldness, the shaving is like up here, not the full face. Yeah, nice. I like that interpretation. There are some echoes of that phrase about like the covering of the upper lip in some of the prophetic literature in the Bible. It was an alternate topic for, if I get this parsha next year, I might explore there. But Lois, if you're interested in that and you have what I would refer you to is, if you're familiar with Sefaria, right, the online Jewish library, that's a great tool in our day. If you go to the verse from today and click on it, and search in the commentaries for people who focus on that part of the verse, you'll find connections in the prophets and in the commentary to this idea of covering your upper lip and what it might mean in different contexts. It's beyond the scope of what we looked at today, but you could research that, and then you could come back next year and teach it.
Maybe.
If you feel so empowered. But thanks for pointing that out. There's a lot of there are metaphors here that echo in other parts of our tradition, right? These 2 verses, short, but lots of directions you could go with them. Thanks for calling that. All right, Marcy.
Oh, here we go. There
okay. You go. I immediately connected the baskets and the first fruits to the idea that anybody's sacrifices or things that they bring to the temple or to the sacrificial place are worthy no matter who brings them, no matter what level of bringing they do. And to connect that to impurity, I don't understand. There doesn't seem to be a connection to me, because one accepts the poverty. One says, bring what you can, and that is good. And the others are saying, no, poverty gets you illness.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I think that Rava's interpretation but I would say this, part of the ritual of the bringing of the first fruits is meant to be for everybody. Everybody brings first fruits. And you bring first fruits as where you select how much and how many and how that works based on your crops, which means if you're, a successful farmer, you might be able to bring more than someone who is having less success, or if you have expensive crops or poor crops, right? We need first fruits come from olive trees, which are, it's a more valuable product than, date trees, which is a less valuable product. Right, and the notion, Rava's connection that says poverty follows the poor here. See, the poor people have a harder time, right? This is more of a burden for them to participate in this ritual, and they have to give up the meager baskets that they have as part of the process. He's noting maybe an inequity. But I get it sort of rubs against the ritual. But what's interesting to me when I think about that ritual in this, like that, some of it is human nature. Like for me, I think of the comparison of that story with like Yom Kippur. Like on Yom Kippur, a day, right, in our communities, right, it's one of the most attended synagogue day, right, high synagogue attendance. But in Yom Kippur is a day where we all stand before God as individuals and equals, and that's why in our tradition, right, in fact, we're all supposed to wear like a white shroud, like a kittel, a white robe to make us all equal. But if your synagogues look at like mine, you could look around and see the, different, that people are dressing up towards different levels, which sometimes like baskets can be a symbol of social status. And people, when thinking about how they're going to appear before God in Shul and Yom Kippur, might also be thinking, how am I going to appear before my peers in Shul and Yom Kippur, which is a different look than the themes of Yom Kippur about how you're supposed to show up. Right, on Yom Kippur in particular, right, part of the fasting is not eating and drinking, but also not bathing or grooming, right? So in theory, we should wake up Yom Kippur morning, get dressed to go to synagogue, and not comb our hair, not put on makeup, not do the things that we do when we go out for something festive, because really we're standing before God in repentance. And it strikes me here, this public ritual of the Bikurim, of first fruits in the temple, became a social event where things of social status and wealth showed up in how the people did it, and maybe even how it was understood. We have those moments in our day, where that plays out for us as well. I do like the sentiment of what you said, right? Everyone should bring first fruits, and it doesn't matter who you are, that's your contribution. We should embrace it. And I think that's a great principle in terms of philanthropy. We have to think about where in our rituals are we living the value of equal access, equal appreciation for everyone, no matter where they're coming from, and where do other societal norms and values or human emotions move us to a different place. And maybe in the Bible, and I think more definitely in the rabbinic text we see how these associations, poverty, illness, people are down on their luck, like we can go to places that don't express the highest of our human selves and the highest of our values. And I think it appears in our text and appears today as well. But thank you for calling that out. All right, Ginny, I think you were next. It looks like you're sitting nicely in Jerusalem today. Or it's just...
Thank you. I'm wondering about the difference between whether the tzarat is found on the walls, on the clothes, or on the person. Is there any spiritual meaning for that different aspect of the affliction?
Ooh, that's a great question, right? As I said at the beginning in the introduction, right, the tzarat can appear on people, it could appear on walls, it could appear on clothes. That's part of the mystery of like what this thing is, because right, we know like there are places where if you have a damp basement, you can know about tzarat or mold, growing on your walls. Could happen on clothes too, but in our understanding of things like marks on walls are different from marks on skin, and they might be different scientific phenomenon, but the Bible puts them under all of tzarat. There are ways in which the purification process in the Torah is different for all three, because how you clean a house and how you clean a person, ritually clean is different. The spiritual question is a great one, and that's some of what the commentators over the generations have asked in our tradition. What does it mean when you're inflicted with this? What does it mean when your house is inflicted with this? Some read it as just like there's purity and impurity, which is just out there. That like there's not a judgment put on it. Meaning in the society that had purity and impurity, sometimes you got impure and then you just had to purify yourself. Meaning Here's a more simple example. If you come into contact with a dead body, you become impure, and there's a ritual to purify yourself. Given this, right, today, most people die, right, in a facility, some sort of medical healthcare facility, as opposed to, right, in the rabbinic and biblical times, most people died in their homes, right? People came into contact with dead bodies more often, and so this impurity they contracted more often. It wasn't bad. Someone died, you became impure because you lived in the same home as them. There's a ritual you had to go to purify yourself, and then you were pure. It was sort of just a normal part of life, right? If there's a spiritual quality to this, which some commentators over time think about, everyone has their own implementation about what this affliction is. Is it something that someone gets because their lifestyle is wrong? Is it something that someone gets because their morality is wrong? Is it just something that happens? Our tradition gives you all of those opinions, right? It's possible next week for Mitzorah, I don't want to spoil who's ever teaching next week, right? There's a connection the rabbis make between Mitzorah, which is the person who has tzara'at, right? A person with the affliction. The Hebrew word is Mitzorah, and the rabbis make a pun to motzi shem ra. It's a phrase that means someone who gives someone else a bad name. And they connect the affliction of tzara'at to someone who talks badly about others, and connects the language of the ethics of speech to the skin infliction. And they make us, so that approach says there's a spiritual ethical connection between this disease and someone's actions, but not everyone goes that direction. So there's more to say there, but also like years of study to look at all those sources that go there. But thank you for raising that point. And that could be a whole, day of weekly Torah study for us.
Thank you so much, Rabbi. And I think we have time for one more question. So we'll go to Raphael.
Okay, now, is there any explanation of what type of skin disease it would be? Because it's not leper, but
there's a whole conversation about that. Both biblical scholars and medical scholars and people interested, try to say, what could this be? What does this look like? There are ways in which what the Torah describes is hard to line up with skin diseases and house molds and things that we know about, which is why, I like the translation that I chose to use on my slides today doesn't translate tzara'at to English. It just says tzara'at, leaving it with the original phrase, because, I'm in the camp of this is something we're not sure what it is, which leads us to think about what does it represent? Like some of your questions did. There's no one answer to that question. There's multiple answers. And that's probably also a whole weekly Torah study of its own, to look at what do the biologists and modern scientists say this could be and why. And I'd have to do more study and prep on my own to give you a fuller answer than just this. But Rabbi Google might lead you to many articles and sources that could help you answer that question. Not my area of expertise, but it is a great question. Awesome. So I hope that you have an infliction-free Shabbat on your skin and in your home. I guess not just Shabbat, but especially, I guess we're thinking about it this Shabbat, but we should all live infliction-free. And when we do find ourselves with some sort of infliction, physical, spiritual, or otherwise, I hope that we can all draw from our communities and that they provide us a support. And the takeaway really is, if you're suffering in some way, don't keep it to yourself, but find the voice in your community that will amplify the infliction that you're feeling properly, so that those around you, your neighbors and your loved ones, can turn back towards you and find a way, whether it's by leaving a flower at your door or praying on your behalf, do something to help you through it, because we have to be here for each other, especially at the hard times.
Thank you so much, Rabbi. And before we sign off, and we wish you all a Shabbat Shalom, I just want to bring to everyone's attention, we will be sharing the recording, we will be sharing the source sheet, but just so you know, we do have a healing community as part of My Jewish Learning, which meets every Monday, with some breaks for the upcoming Passover holiday, but we will be meeting on Monday. And that is just a short session. It's about 15 minutes. We have someone, a rabbi, who will come in and share some words of Torah, some inspiring words of healing, and then we recite the Misha Beirach together. So in the follow-up, I will include details on that. It does feel appropriate, especially for this parsha. And thank you, Rabbi. Thank you all for your questions, for your thoughts. I echo Rabbi's message of an affliction-free Shabbat and week. So we hope to see you next week. Bye-bye.
Nice. Shabbat shalom, everybody. Nice to see y'all.